So there's a theory that grounds the work that I do. It's really my own theory of change. It's backed in science and it exists. It's called the contact theory hypothesis. And if I could see all of your faces, I would be asking you if you've heard about this before, because it's so fascinating to me. The contact theory hypothesis asserts that the more contact that you can have with someone who has a completely different experience or background than you, the more likely that is to foster tolerance and empathy and understanding, which can bridge the gaps that we see around us. So the more that we as a humanity or as a group can interact with people outside of our own silos, our own echo chambers, that actually creates more and more tolerance and empathy and respect that can be a baseline for moving that needle on bringing the world together. So today, I want to propose something that I hope will resonate with all of you, that helps me every single time I navigate a difficult conversation. Because the way that we build a unified world is not only by building relationships, but also by having conversations. And so what I want to talk about today is that good conversations are just like having good relationships. And so as today's event here at CCA is really talking about relationship building and how that leads up to managing conflict, I would like to propose that navigating these difficult conversations takes the same rationale of what you may be thinking about how you can foster good relationships in your own life. So I hope that today I can help point out the similarities between having a good conversation and a good relationship, and how channeling both can help us navigate and mitigate conflict whenever it arises. Number one for me, when it comes to a good conversation and a good relationship, is a foundation. In every good relationship, you have to start somewhere, right? There has to be on the pyramid, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs when it comes to a relationship that can help you build on top of. So for me, the different characteristics of a really strong relationship when it comes to a foundation include so many different elements, but a few I want to highlight today are trust, respect, and equality. And these are things that sometimes I used to not even think about when it came to conversation, but has helped me navigate some of the hardest conversations in my own life. So when it comes to building a strong foundation for your conversation, try to be as authentically you as possible. You want the relationship or the conversation to be as pure as it possibly can. And the best thing you can do is to show up in a conversation completely as yourself. And one of the best things to channel in being yourself is humility. Realizing that you may not know it all, and there are things that you are still hoping to understand. So start out with being yourself, because that's how you can adequately and accurately build trust. Secondly, something that really helps to navigate difficult conversations is celebrating our own shared humanity. Because we're at arm's length from one another, and sometimes with the person you may be going into that conversation with, it's so important to find a way to realize that we have so much more in common than that which divides us. So whenever possible, try to find a commonality that you may share with that person, and that can help you, even in the hardest moments, hold on to the humanity of the other person across the table from you. And a quick example where this is applied to my own life is in our own Gen Z community. There's an individual who will not be named who has very different political opinions than myself. And every single day I show up in our community to navigate those conversations in a way where I can hopefully learn and open myself up to that person's experience. And I started thinking one day that there is quite possibly nothing that I could agree with this person on, and it was starting to get me a little bit red in the face, and feeling a little bit frustrated that this person had such opposite views than me. And I wound up in a conversation with this person about a very light conversation topic. And after a few of those conversations, one was about television, one was about food, for me, even the simplest realization in knowing that we both like our steaks cooked medium rare, or that we both love watching The Office, has helped me retain that perspective that this is just another person who comes from a completely set of different lived experiences than myself, has helped me navigate those conversations with this individual moving forward. So whenever possible, Try to hold on and cling to the things that you can connect with that person about when the going gets tough. And lastly, try to tell yourself when you're entering that hard conversation that the person across the table from you or across the DMs from you is an equal. I think oftentimes, because we're fed so much information online, we tend to think that our way of thinking is the only way of thinking. And as much as possible, that when you can treat the other person as an equal in that dialogue that has equal right to be there, equal right to have a say and a voice and an opinion, that will also help level the playing field when you're navigating. So that's part number one of my own formula for creating strong and lasting relationships that mirror what it looks like to have a really important, meaningful dialogue. Number two, there has to be intention. I don't know if any of you have felt this way, but there have been so many times that I can't even count on my two hands combined where I've entered a conversation with the wrong intention. And maybe sometimes even realizing that I didn't even have an intention set. But if you can go into a conversation knowing exactly what you want to get out of it and exactly where you think you need to take a step back, will help you set the right expectations to not be so disappointed or shell-shocked when something does not go your way. And I think where a lot of us get it wrong, and I have experienced this countless times over, is thinking that conversations are to be won. I am very competitive. I used to play national volleyball, and I used to think that when it came to conversations that there always had to be a winner and a loser. And where I got that mixed up was drawing a line between what is a debate and what is a conversation. And so whenever possible, try to enter a conversation knowing that the conversation is not to be won. The intention to be there is to better understand that other person's experience outside of your own, to foster empathy, to better listen, learn, and understand, so that you are not attempting to change the other person's mind, but rather to be there to listen and grow. And once you set that expectation and truly know the difference between a conversation and a debate, you're much more likely to set your conversation up for success. And if you think about the sports metaphor for another moment, when you go in really without that intention and things escalate, it's really easy for someone to be caught on the defensive, always feeling that they need to defend their own views at all costs and not even being present in the moment and listening to potentially your point of view because they want to share theirs in an attempt to win. It's so important to even communicate that intention to the other person. So it's not just for yourself, but you can say, hey, I hope it's okay, but I would love to share what I hope to get out of this conversation today so that we can start on the same level. And I think communicating your own needs and expectations in a conversation can only set your conversation up for success. So that is number two, setting that expectation and that intention so that you can make sure that when you enter that conversation, you know exactly why you're having it. Number three on the list, like any good relationship, in a difficult conversation, there has to be consent. And this is something that I've started coining over the years as conversational consent. And show of hands, if you're in your living room or at your office, put up a hand if this has resonated with you. Have you ever been approached by someone to have a conversation that you were not ready to have? I know I have. I have been in a situation where I was either too tired or completely caught off guard, and someone in my life has wanted to have a really hard conversation with me, but I was not in the right headspace. And I, in the moment, didn't have the tips and tools to set the right boundaries or know how to react. And in fact, it actually made the conversation go awry because I was not ready to have it in the first place. So when you are thinking about navigating difficult conversations, one of the biggest things to remember is making sure that both parties are wanting to have that conversation at that moment in time. And it may sound uncomfortable to ask in the moment, but after you start asking, it becomes second nature and muscle memory. And sometimes it's just as easy as asking if that person is okay to have that conversation right now, or saying, hey, there's something on my mind. I would love to talk to you about it. Is this a good time? And if that person says no, That is so not a problem. You can just respond as you would a friend. You know, if there's a time where you do feel ready, can you let me know? I'd love to talk when you're ready. And being able to respect that person's space and their boundaries will also create the right environment to have that difficult conversation. So when in doubt, know your own limits, know when you're ready to have that conversation, but extend that to your conversation partner and really try to understand if this is the right time and the right space to have that dialogue. And if you're not ready, that is completely okay. In addition to consent, like any good relationship, there has to be give and take. You know, you are in a relationship, it's not a one-way street, and in that conversation, it's the exact same way. So whenever possible, try to think of that conversation or that environment as an opportunity to not only have your voice heard, but to hear others as well. So listen more than you speak. It can be difficult, especially in the conversations you feel most passionate about, but I promise you, in giving that space for other people to be heard, you are now creating that environment for that person to hear you. And this is something that we really try to channel in the work that we do at the Conversationalist, and making sure that every single person who shows up every day to navigate these conversations is not only there to pursue their own agenda and get their voices heard, but that in order to be a conversationalist or a person dedicated to bringing the world together, you also have to listen to what other people have to say. So whenever possible, think of that conversation as any good relationship where you give some, you take some, but most importantly, you want to be there to listen more than you speak. And in addition, ask as many questions as possible. Try to dig deeper and be curious. This is one of my favorite tips for navigating difficult conversations, because I try to treat conversations like a courtroom. And bear with me, this is an interesting analogy, but I promise you it works. Oftentimes, especially in the age of social media, when we see someone share something on Instagram or tweet something short and sweet, we like to jump to conclusions, right? There's an initial search for judgment because we want to figure out what that person really means. But oftentimes, we don't take that extra step to better understand what someone's intentions are. And like a judge in a courtroom, there is no verdict in a case until many questions are asked, until you get to interview different witnesses, until you get to the bottom of the issue, and then the gavel hits the wood. So whenever possible in a conversation, try to think of yourself as that judge and try as best as possible to ask and ask and ask to better understand why that person believes what they believe. Where did that view come from? Where did this particular issue become important in their lifetime? And really understanding what are the different elements of their perspective that ladder up to what they believe today. And this has really helped in my own life to ask as many questions as possible. And a quick example I will give is around an experience that I had with something anti-Semitic. And that again means a little bit of anti-Jewish sentiment that could have been misconstrued as hateful. And in our community, we were having a conversation, and all of a sudden someone made a joke that was a little bit disrespectful to my Judaism. They made a joke surrounding a very age-old trope in Judaism that I found to be very offensive. And in that moment, I think my younger self would have felt humiliated and mortified and scared to navigate that dialogue, but I tried to channel this aspect of asking questions. So what I did is I tried to better understand why this person held that belief. Where did it come from? Was it their upbringing? Was it their religion? Was it their environment? And through those questions, this person was able to help me understand that they grew up probably in the opposite experience of me. They were probably only surrounded by people who were like them, but didn't have a Jewish student to even have a connection to growing up. And so in understanding that it was just a matter of sheer ignorance and not having any connecting point to another Jewish person in their life, that was what created this trope and this bias about Judaism. And once I asked all of these questions, I was then able to speak from my own experience to help this person understand why that perspective was harmful or hurtful, especially as a Jewish person myself. So when in doubt, be that judge in the courtroom and ask as many questions as possible. And this last piece when it comes to give and take is something that I think is so relevant, especially when it comes to mental health, which I know is an issue that CCA is so passionate about. And again, bear with me if you can. Raise your hand in your home or your office or whatever environment you're in right now if this has applied to you. Raise your hand if you have ever been in a conversation with someone or you've shared something that you're going through, and really all you wanted in that moment was for the other person to listen to you and not to give you their take or their opinion or their advice, and it ended with some sort of feeling of frustration. I know I've been there. I think something that is crucial to navigating difficult conversations, kind of going off of conversational consent, is knowing how to ask the person what they need from you in that moment. Because even though conversations are two-way streets, there are some conversations that are only meant to be reciprocated when that person is ready. And so, especially when it comes to mental health, or if someone is struggling and opening up to you or being vulnerable about something, sometimes before you respond or before you give your opinion or your advice, something that I found to be incredibly helpful is to ask the other person what they need from you in that moment. And giving that person the option to answer, even if they just respond right away and say, "I'd love your advice," allows you to feel confident in knowing that what you share with that person will be well received. So when in doubt, try to be what that other person or your conversation partner needs in that moment, and offer that up for yourself as well. If you are being vulnerable and sharing something that you don't typically share about, and you really just want to be heard, try to communicate that need so the other person knows how to meet you where you are. And lastly, like any good relationship, I've been there, I'm sure you've been there too, there is bound to be disagreement. And I'm here to tell you today that that is okay. There is a way to agree to disagree in a way that allows you to still grow and stay true to what you believe in. So when there is disagreement that arises, try to remind yourself to embrace that discomfort. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable and know that that discomfort is where the growth begins to happen. And there is such a thing as good conflict. There's research that backs this. And so whenever possible, try not to be avoidant to that conflict. There's a human tendency for us to try to avoid any sort of confrontation or tension. I know I used to be that way. And what actually ends up happening when you avoid conflict is your emotions bubble up in a way that will lead eventually to an emotional outburst that is not productive. And so when conflict arises, if you feel like you have the confidence and the tools to have that dialogue, try to lean into it. And instead of putting your foot on the brakes, try switching them to the gas and see what happens. And lastly, whenever there is disagreement, I want you to know that that disagreement will be difficult. It's not always easy. There isn't a quick fix. And when in doubt, this philosophy is something that I always try to stand by. When you're having a conversation with someone that gets incredibly difficult or disagreement arises, try to be the reason why someone believes in the goodness of people, and try to remind yourself that at the end of the day, it is far more important to be kind than to be right. And don't get me wrong, when it comes to a factual debate and you want to stand up for something that you know is factually true, absolutely stand up for what you believe in. By no means back down. But at the end of the day, just remember that like a good relationship with give and take, try to pick your battles wisely and know how at the end of the day, we're all human beings, we're all learning and evolving. And at the end of the day, it's okay sometimes to just be more kind than to be right.